Unknown Number, The Highschool Catfish is one of the most popular shows on Netflix right now. It's a documentary about two teenagers, Owen and Lauren, who are viciously bullied and stalked online. And then there's a crazy twist. It turns out the cyberbully is not another teen, but Lauren's own mom. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and today on Commotion, we are getting into it. Lauren Smiley is an investigative journalist whose story about the case appeared in The Cut back in January. And Kathryn VanArendonk is a critic for Vulture and, of course, a regular here on Commotion. Welcome back, Kathryn, and welcome, Lauren.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Lauren, before we even talk about the documentary, I want to spend a bit of time talking about this case itself. You know it probably better than just about anyone. What made this story so compelling to you as a journalist?
So I'm usually drawn to stories about how tech has warped human behavior in some way, and usually not for the better. So definitely a mother cyberbullying their own kid got my attention. But maybe because I did not have access to the Licari family at the center of this story, I became just as interested in how this was the story of a town. It's a whodunit in this tiny town where everyone thinks they know everyone's business, which made it so incredibly confounding to people that someone could get away with this for so long without being found out. That became really interesting to me. So it's like the internet's anonymity coming to this rural town where everyone knows not only each other, but their extended families. And by the end, I realized this story also was a bit of a time capsule of 2021, 2022. It was peak adults throwing up their hands and saying, there's nothing we can do about teens and their cell phones. Both the school and the parents of the kids who were getting bullied kept pointing the finger at each other, asking the other party to take away the kids' phones, and sort of flabbergasted that they wouldn't. And both of them claimed they didn't have the power to take away teens' phones, that it's just they're secondhand at this point, and that there's nothing they can do. And we've already seen a huge amount of backlash to phones just in the last few years. Jonathan Haidt has his book out about taking cell phones away from kids. States and districts are starting to put bans on phones during school hours. So we're starting to see the backlash. But these were those final years where there's just there's nothing to be done.
Yes. Oh, whatever will we do about those pesky phones? Lauren, quickly, I want to talk about your choice to protect Lauren Licari's anonymity, because in your story in The Cut, which came out months before the Netflix doc, you gave her a pseudonym. Why did you want to do that? Why did you feel that was important?
Yeah, my editors at the magazine and I took that question really seriously. We talked about it a lot. And despite many, many tries, the Licari family didn't speak with us. So where we landed as a magazine was that Lauren is a minor. She's a victim of crime, and she didn't participate in our story. The documentary where she is identified hadn't come out yet. So we decided to give her another name and just tell readers that we're doing that. Everyone else has their real name in the story.
Kathryn, let's talk about the documentary now. I admit fully, whatever it says about me as a person, as soon as I saw the thumbnail and I knew what the story was about, I clicked immediately on the Netflix doc. What did you think about it, and how did you feel watching it? Because we never come away from these things being like, well, that was just great.
We do not. And yet we keep clicking, don't we?
Yeah.
And I do think there is something really telling about that. And however else I feel about the documentary, I do think it's worth noting up top that it succeeds, right, at what it wants, which is to get people to watch it and talk about it. It is Netflix has really made sure that its creators can perfect exactly the form that will get people into these stories, keep eyeballs on them, and make us want to talk about them. So from that perspective, it is hard to describe it as anything other than wildly successful. There are, however, a number of other perspectives from which to think about this documentary. And one of them is exactly the issue that you were just talking about with Lauren, which is this question of how we think about the role of minors in stories like this. And I found it by the end to be incredibly uncomfortable to watch and to think about in terms of how they put it together and how it is presented, precisely because the person at the real center of this story is a minor. There's been so little time for her to sort of process and move through what this experience has been.
Yeah, I should
And
say, Kathryn, sorry to cut you off, but
yeah,
Lauren and Owen were just 13 when they
yeah,
started getting these really horrible, sickening, hateful, and sexually explicit messages on their phones, just to give people a bit of context for like how horrible this story really was.
100%. And she speaks directly to the camera in a way that, she was not participating in Lauren's story. And uh, I understand why there is this desire for fame, but at the same time, have been all these other documentaries recently that are also about children, and I find them equally exploitative and upsetting and often ethically wrong. And for me, this documentary is a part of that cohort.
There is a pivotal moment in this documentary where police confront this mom, Kendra, and she finally confesses. And I want to play some of the footage from the body cam because it's a really like arresting moment where the police officer is explaining to this young girl that her mom is the one who's been sending these messages while her mom is holding her and hugging her. Let's listen to that.
All right, Miss Lauren, so I'm just going to start the conversation. You guys have been under a lot of stress lately, some moves going on, some financial issues and everything else going on. Mom got wrapped up into some stuff, so we found some evidence and we have a search warrant. We're going to take her phone and stuff. Your mom doesn't want this to get out, but it is some public information, so it's not going to not get out. I just want to be honest about it, all right?
I mean, that moment really changed the doc for me. I just couldn't help but put myself in that poor girl's shoes. Lauren, you read the sheriff's report about that moment, but police didn't actually give you access to that footage when you asked for it. I wonder, because of how impactful that scene was, did you, knowing so much about the case, did you learn anything new actually watching that moment? Did it change the case for you at all?
Well, the report that I had access to, it just had this gaping hole of what Lauren's reaction to this news was that day. And also just like the body language between the family members, how Kendra reacted to her family being told this in front of her. I had, the sheriff's report, it talked quite a bit actually about like what was said, what Kendra said, what the father said. But I didn't have that context of just the scene of how they were reacting. And I know we don't have visuals here on a podcast, but what happened is as soon as the sheriff told Lauren this news, well, first she was just like stunned, entirely silent, did not say a word in the clips that were shown on the documentary. She told the documentary that she was just incredibly confused at that moment. And Kendra moves in and sort of like comforts her, hugs her, kisses her head while this is going on. And the daughter does allow it. She allows this affection. And eventually by the end starts crying and like hugs her mom back. But none of that was in the report. But I mean, one thing is this was incredibly consistent with what everyone I interviewed had told me about Lauren's relationship with her mother. That they were incredibly close at the center of each other's lives, that Lauren was a very quiet person always, and then this cyberbullying saga made her almost silent as a person, like just was shutting down as a person. And also that when this came out in Beale City, that her mother had been doing this, that Lauren hadn't really spoken about this episode, just this whole saga in detail with any other kids. But she still very much wanted a relationship with her mom, was still close to her mom, was still talking to her mom in prison. All that was known. So those dynamics are there in that scene. It was interesting to see that with my own eyes, but it was in line with what people said the relationship was between those two.
Kathryn, I had actually heard about the story well before I knew that there was a Netflix doc coming out about it, just because it's one of those true crime things that piques your interest and you go, a mom cyberbullying her own daughter. But it's gotten to the point now where I feel like when I read a story that's truly strange online, I'm sort of just waiting for the Netflix doc about it. I'm curious to know, like, what are some of the ethical questions that come up for you watching this doc, but just watching any of the documentaries in this like new canon of Netflix true crime?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different sort of canons. I think there are, like, the idea of a Netflix true crime canon is something that we have been building toward from really early. Like, one of the biggest Netflix hits was Making a Murderer, and
Yeah.
that really shifted a lot of the landscape. The one that I have been more interested by recently, it feels like this group of not necessarily Netflix, but documentaries that have appeared in a lot of different streaming platforms that are about kids. There's a Ruby Frankie doc on Hulu. There has been, there was the one about kid stars on Nickelodeon, which was an ID doc. And then there was another sort of kid influencers one. And the thing that I tend to think about, particularly in that context, that I think is true for all true crime, but is more pointed for kids, is when something comes out when a kid is still a minor, and so they are not making an adult choice to participate, you are sort of, it is an exploded, intensified version of every true crime doc that comes out immediately. And there has not been chance to watch the full reverberations in a community for these people in their lives. There's not been a chance for experts to really consider all of the evidence. There's not been a chance to digest what this story actually looks like in a more full context. And that's the thing that I increasingly have been thinking about as for true crime broadly, but then particularly for things related to kids.
Lauren, I think one of the questions that you're left asking with this documentary is just why Kendra Licari would do this to her own daughter. And it's a question that the doc doesn't really answer. And I just, you looked into the story very deeply. What did you come to understand from everyone you spoke to on just like why this happened?
Certainly, some people in the community were getting very close to what Kendra said her motivations were, like in the doc. The principal was a very insightful guy, and he noticed that the texting had kicked in when the daughter was in 7th grade. So like as she becomes a teen, the age that they start moving away from their parents. And I spoke with 3 experts on Munchausen's by proxy, it's a mental health disorder in which a parent like fakes sicknesses in their child to serve their the parent's own psychological needs. Maybe you've seen this in like The Sixth Sense. There was a Munchausen's plot line in that, or like the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. Kendra never says the word Munchausen's, and of course we cannot medically diagnose her, but experts in Munchausen's told me her behavior was very closely aligning with this. The wanting to keep her kid close and needing her, depending on her to get through this hardship. Kendra wanting to draw attention to herself as like the hero in town, handling this harrowing situation, like among the school community. She was telling anyone who had listened to her in those years that this was going on. And also just like the manipulation that, one expert told me that the lying is often not just isolated to this one thing, that it like people who have Munchausen's tend to be very good liars in many realms of their lives. And that was certainly, as I learned more and more about Kendra's story, that was certainly going on in her life as well. So Kendra's explanation in the doc was that she had been raped as a teen, and when her own daughter was entering her teen years, her suppressed trauma was resurfacing about this event. Kendra got scared. She wanted to control her daughter's journey. She was afraid of letting her grow up. She wanted to keep her close. So while she doesn't say Munchausen's, there's certainly like a center of a Venn diagram there between what Munchausen's experts say are motivations of people with Munchausen's.
Right. I mean, I guess it's how can you ever know why a person does it? But certainly it kept a lot of people watching. Really appreciate you both being here and talking about this doc with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren Smiley is a features writer. You can read her story about the case in The Cut, and Kathryn VanArendonk is a critic at Vulture and a regular here on Commotion. Unknown Number, The High School Catfish, is streaming now on Netflix. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, we're going to switch gears now and talk about a comedy series that has a lot of people talking. You might remember the long-awaited Superman reboot that hit theaters this summer and ushered in this new James Gunn era of the DC superhero universe. But it's actually the new season of the series Peacemaker, starring pro wrestler John Cena, that people are saying is kind of the most entertaining entry in this new reimagined DC world. Pablo The Don has been watching the latest season of Peacemaker. They're with me now. Pablo, welcome back to Commotion.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about Peacemaker. He is this like D-list anti-superhero. He's scorned by his peers. He's struggling with a lot of personal demons. And he's doing it all while trying to be a better hero. What else should people know about Peacemaker and what the show is about before diving into the series?
So I think some of the big things people need to know is that Peacemaker, whose real name is Chris Smith, first appeared in the Suicide Squad back in 2021. He's an expert marksman, but he's not necessarily like your typical superhero. He didn't fall into like a vat of toxic waste or anything like that. He's an expert marksman and like a weapons designer. And he's basically defined by this like contradictory ideology that he'll do anything to achieve peace, including kill anyone to achieve that. And then after the Suicide Squad premiere, James Gunn, who initially wrote this role for Dave Bautista, another professional wrestler, actually really enjoyed John Cena's performance and decided to create an entire television series focused on Chris Smith's redemption arc.
Let's check out a scene from season 2 of Peacemaker now.
I made a vow to have peace, no matter how many people I have to kill to get it.
Oh, Peacemaker!
Yes!
You're that racist superhero!
No!
You only kill minorities, man!
Somebody's committing a crime,
Yes?
and I'm supposed to control what their ethnicity is?
No, but you need to watch white people as closely as you watch people of color so you see more of them committing crimes.
Fine, that's a good point. I will trust white people less in the future and kill a higher percentage of them. Are you satisfied?
Yes.
So that is a moment from the TV series Peacemaker starring John Cena. Very funny moment. Pablo, you're a diehard wrestling fan and familiar with Cena's star trajectory. How do you feel about his performance as Peacemaker? Because I think it caught a lot of people off guard.
I think so. I've watched John Cena since 2002 when he debuted in WWE on SmackDown, and he's evolved really from this like charismatic but one-dimensional kind of figure, the you can't see me guy doing the raps, to this like really surprisingly versatile actor. And I think this is truly like his career-defining performance because it allows him to showcase his comedic timing, which we've seen at some point in wrestling, but also like his dramatic chops, like his facial expressions and his eyes in this series really do tell like a deeper story of Peacemaker and how deeply flawed and conflicted the character really is. And I think the vulnerability that Cena brings to the character is something that I was shocked about, but also like pleasantly surprised because we don't really get that much from like WWE stars turning into actors.
Right. Although it's funny when we are surprised because it's like the whole point of pro wrestling is that you are a great entertainer. You can really sell these characters. So I do think it's funny that we're like, well, how are they so good at acting? I mean, that's all they do.
Exactly.
A lot of the reviews about the show have talked about kind of the subversiveness. You know, they tackle these kind of like bro culture tropes about sexuality and toxic masculinity. How do you feel about the way the show's handling those themes?
I think it does a really good job of like effectively deconstructing this toxic masculinity by showing like Chris's worldview is pretty much a direct result from the abuse he like got from his father. And I think his like outwardly like macho persona is such a flimsy shield for someone who is clearly so deeply insecure and traumatized. And I think the way that they use humor to really tackle those subjects without really making light of them is genius. Like it really satirizes the entire bro culture that we've seen going on and how it causes actual real world harm. And I think like anytime he makes like a crude or offensive jokes, you can tell that people are kind of checking it by either giving him these off-colored looks or directly confronting him being like, what are you talking about? So I think it's a really good balance of showing where we kind of are as a society, but also showing how people are pushing back against a lot of these talking points that people do bring up in the real world.
Mm-hmm. And we, got to mention that, yes, the show kind of hinges on this incredible performance from Cena, but it's built this like great cast of characters around him. You have Danielle Brooks from Orange is the New Black and actor Robert Patrick. So what are some of the other characters you really found yourself rooting for watching Peacemaker?
I think Danielle Brooks's character Leota is really like the heart of the team. She's new to the team in season 1, and she really represents like the audience's moral compass. And her friendship with Peacemaker to me is one of the most compelling ones in the series. And I'm really rooting for her, especially now, to find the courage to stand up to her mom because her mom is Amanda Waller and forge her own path. But I also think Vigilante is a super interesting person played by Freddie Stroma, and his character is clearly like a sociopath, but he has like this unwavering loyalty and like childhood like obsession to Peacemaker, and he provides a lot of the show's best comedic moments, so you can't help but be fascinated by this. And his genuine desire to be Peacemaker's best friend, even in like this deranged scenario, is so endearing to me. I love it. I think Vigilante is such a good representation of like how people really are obsessed with superheroes and how they like put them on these pedestals, even though these people are like deeply flawed and traumatic, especially within these series.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's such a good time for like the other side of the hero.
Yes.
It's also a really interesting moment for wrestlers turned actors, as we were saying. The Rock is getting a lot of Oscar buzz potentially for his performance in The Smashing Machine, which just premiered at TIFF. And Dave Bautista, obviously, he's been heavily praised for his roles in Guardians of the Galaxy, Blade Runner 2049. My son just watched a bunch of Marvel movies yesterday, and I found myself once again like laughing and crying along with Dave Bautista's performances. Where do you think John Cena sits in that kind of arc of wrestlers turned actors?
I think it's a very interesting world because before we were so used to direct to DVD movies that came from WWE and WWE studios that had these actors. But once The Rock kind of broke out when he did The Scorpion King and Be Cool, it opened up a new world for wrestlers to go into this lane. But then we saw him particularly be typecast in these like action roles that were just played up versions of The Rock, in my opinion. And then when Batista kind of comes in and does Guardians of the Galaxy and Blade Runner and Dune, you see that there are people that are former pro wrestlers who really want to take risks. And I think Batista was kind of the first one to be like, let's do something different. I don't need to be the jacked up, like musclehead, beefhead. And I think you really see that in Glass Onion specifically with him. Mm-hmm. So I think Cena now, both doing Trainwreck with Amy Schumer, being this just funny dude that she ends up like not dating, but continuously has relations with. And then his performance here puts him in that category with Batista, but also seeing that The Rock has now switched and is doing The Smashing Machine and doing a very serious role that's still very like action focused and sports focused, but playing someone else that he has to step into is such an interesting place to be. And I'm excited to see where more pro wrestlers go, but also where these three go, because they're all leading the charge here.
Yeah, definitely. Pablo, I just have 30 seconds for this last question, but John Cena is basically on a farewell tour with WWE. What would you say his sort of overall contributions are to the world of wrestling as he prepares to say goodbye to it?
People may get upset with me at this, but I think it's undeniable that John Cena is the greatest of all time. From the amount of time he spent in WWE over 20 years, the amount of time he led the charge, the merch sales, his Make-A-Wish contributions, the most Make-A-Wishes ever completed is by John Cena. He is simply going to go down in history as the greatest professional wrestler of all time. just undebatable. And I'm wishing him well on his journey and endeavor, even if I'm sad for him to go.
Wow, I love that. And I'm sure people will want to debate you on that, but we're going to have to leave it there. Pablo, thanks so much for having this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Pablo The Don is a culture critic and part of Those Wrestling Girls podcast. They were in Springfield, Massachusetts. Season 2 of Peacemaker is streaming weekly right now on Crave. And that is it for the program. I am Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Thanks for listening.